Hey everyone, Troy Hammond here, and that means you're listening or you're watching the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. On today's episode, we're chatting with Harry Wilde. Harry is a young Kiwi entrepreneur who's founded or co-founded and is co-CEO of Cotiss, which is the world's easiest to use procurement software. And if you hear procurement software and your mind goes, I'm not sure, I can tell you this is a really interesting chat. Harry and his team came up through the design industry, finding some challenges with the procurement softwares and finding some challenges with the procurement process. And one of these smart teams that decided, we can fix this. And so they've developed the world's easiest to use procurement software that suits small to medium procurement teams throughout New Zealand or globally. And it's a really interesting chat about how they started the business, how they've just recently raised money, and how they're growing now. And we go pretty deep on that process. And so if you're thinking about starting a company in New Zealand, if you're thinking about software, if you're thinking about raising money, strap in and enjoy this one because you get to join the ride of Harry and his team.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
Are you prepared for like all the things that are coming? Like, are you, if everything takes off and you're in the news all the time, are you prepared to get on and, present in the media?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we did a Herald article probably like a month ago, and that was like a real reminder of like, I guess just like your place in the world, because we did like all this media training and we were like, oh my God, he's gonna ask us all these really difficult questions. Just Chris was like the nicest guy. Yeah. Clearly there was like no gotcha, but you start getting in your own head and you start being like, oh, this is like our first experience with the media. Everyone's out to get us. And then you do it and you're like, oh, that was actually really easy. That was like a 20-minute interview, was very chilled. Yeah. So I think so. I don't know.
Everyone always worries about it coming on the podcast. They're like, oh, what are you going to ask? Is it what? And at the end, they're like, oh man, that was easy.
Yeah.
It was an easy chat. I'm like, I don't think any Kiwis out there to be some sort of crazy investigative journalist in the tech world.
Yeah.
Like, are you the next dodgy Time magazine cover 30 before 30?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't think there's that much dodgy stuff. I don't think our ecosystem's that big.
Yeah, I can't.
Well, I mean, I say that and actually there could be a whole bunch, but I don't know about any.
Yeah, well, as a recruitment owner, we definitely hear about the good and the bad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so I wouldn't say there's anything dodgy, but there's definitely nuances that we hear and we go, oh, we're going to avoid working with that company.
Oh, really? Oh, well, hopefully not Cotiss.
No, definitely. Like the procurement space definitely seems to be legit. I'd hope so. Being a procurement software, that everything's hunky dory.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like I look at some companies in the B2C space, and I'm like, man, I wish I could be running. Like, I'm definitely not the kind of person who could run a B2C company. Yeah. But I'm like, you guys are just so like liberal with how you present. Whereas for like procurement software, we're selling to like high regulation, high compliance industries who are just like super risk and probity conscious. So for us, we kind of have to like double check everything. I think we're a bit annoying for like marketing agencies and other people to deal with, because we're like properly go through the T's and C's, be like, you need to edit this clause, you need to change this, like this needs to be different. I think it just kind of comes from running like serious B2B. I don't want to say serious, but like, the people we deal with are like a lot of ex-lawyers, ex-accountants, things like that. Yeah, you want to be pretty tight in your T's and C's if you're dealing with lawyers. Yeah. How the hell did you get into procurement software, man? Yeah, it's an interesting, it's kind of an interesting space. Like I don't think procurement is the most sexy of like business verticals to be entering.
Yeah, if I was going to choose a sexy software, procurement is not where I'd start.
Yeah, totally. But I think that's kind of what's led to it not being that well serviced from a software perspective. Like, do you understand the procurement process firstly? Because I think a lot of people are kind of a bit confused on what it actually is.
Yeah, I've been through a procurement process many times, and that's just recently with all the government recruitment services, right?
Okay, yeah. So you'll be right into it. Yeah. So I think like a lot of the time procurement is how big business, well, even like mid-sized, but like kind of like complex businesses and government interact with other businesses or run through a procurement process. And it can be this amazing lever of innovation, and it can be this amazing driver of like change, of people, decide to work with startups, or they decide to work with, in New Zealand, Māori and Pacifica businesses, or in, Australia and the US, kind of indigenous businesses, or if there's like a real push to work with social progress businesses, you can do some amazing stuff. But if it's done badly, I just think it just kind of becomes a little bit of a brake pedal for businesses.
Yeah, just a laborious handbrake on
getting
shit done, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like the thing about procurement software is, and actually the procurement space in general, is it's kind of where accounting was 10 years ago. So you've got all these procurement people who are really, really smart people, like really talented, really passionate, and but they're doing all these really manual jobs a lot of the time. Like I won't get too kind of deep into the process, but there's this little bit which is evaluation where you get back all these like supplier responses and you've kind of got to get a panel of people to evaluate them. And if you get that back in Excel, you've got to kind of cut it up, you've got to send it to people, you've got to kind of recompile it, you've got to do all this like scoring in Excel, which just takes hours and hours and hours, and you've got to chase people and all those kind of things. And the comparison that I kind of draw is it's as if accountants were doing like most of their bookkeeping in Excel as opposed to using Xero or like at a more enterprise level using NetSuite. So it just means that procurement teams, which are like under-resourced, I think a little bit underloved sometimes for the important role that they play, they just end up doing like a lot of manual work as opposed to being kind of the strategic thinkers that I think they need to be. And that's a problem that's been compounded by the fact that a lot of the procurement software that's been built is really designed for kind of like big enterprises. It's really heavy implementation. A lot of it's really great if you're a really big procurement team who's, you know, really needs a specific environment set up for you guys. That it works really well. Who it doesn't work for is kind of small and medium procurement teams or larger teams that don't want to spend 12 months implementing something. And that's kind of where we come in. I sort of think of it as like HubSpot versus Salesforce. Like if you want to just switch on a procurement software and you kind of have all these like probity and risk issues, or you just want like a more smooth process to kind of identify like where the gaps in your spending are or things like that. That's kind of where Cotiss comes in. So it's been a big focus on like UI and design, and people are often like, oh, this looks like marketing software.
Awesome.
Which is nice.
That's good feedback for procurement software, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So who's the ideal customer then, like that is buying Cotiss?
Yeah, so we kind of have like, I guess, three-ish customer groups. So we've got like small procurement teams, which is like half an employee to like 5 people. Then there might be like some decentralized buying activity happening across the company. And yeah, basically they just want something that's like cheap, easy to implement. And because we're so simple to implement, we can offer a more competitive price point. Then you kind of have like the mid-market, like more like mid-sized teams. They've got pretty similar needs to small and medium procurement teams. They just might just be at a bigger organization. And then like recently after we did the PR, we've actually noticed we've got all these quite large procurement teams, like kind of like 30, 40, 50 people reaching out to us, and they just haven't inputted procurement software because they didn't want to spend 12 months implementing it. They don't want to spend, you know, $500,000 to $1 million. So yeah, kind of all similar needs, but kind of like distinct groups between them.
Yeah. And so where did Cotiss start then? Where did the idea come from?
Yeah. So I studied politics and economics and law at university. So I've kind of always been fascinated. Yeah. Well, I didn't graduate. So yeah, I was kind of always fascinated by it. And then I went and did an internship at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I wanted to be a diplomat. Pretty quickly realized that like actually government wasn't probably where I was destined to be. So I went into advertising, spent 8 years in advertising, but I was always kind of fascinated by the connection between.
So you're a planner, right?
Yeah. I was an advertising strategist.
Yeah. I get a lot of people ask me, I don't know, obviously I know what it is, but for people listening to that, what the hell does a planner or an advertising strategist do in an agency? Yeah,
totally. So I think of a planner as like the client has this problem, and that problem is like a big white sheet of paper, basically. And creatives, who are the people who actually come up with ideas, aren't particularly good with like big white sheets of paper. So it's kind of the planner's job to draw all these circles in it and be like, hey, look, these are the areas that would be interesting, or like here are like some really interesting insights about the customer or the product or about life itself. And then kind of the creatives fill in those circles with nice, pretty pictures.
Nice. Yeah, awesome. That makes a lot more sense now watching Mad Men. You know, like Don Draper comes in at the end once all the hard work's been done and pitches some crazy idea. Yeah,
well, a lot of the time, like the creative's the thing that's going to kind of accelerate the product, but it's quite hard to do good creative without good planning.
So you had the idea, or you and the team had the idea when you were in that world? Or?
Yeah, so I ended up working with procurement teams quite a bit and doing projects kind of looking at like bidding and procurements throughout my career. And I'd kind of been really drawn to the procurement space. Ended up coming back to New Zealand for a wedding. I was living in Melbourne, ended up getting trapped here due to COVID. Kind of began to reassess my life a little bit, and ended up talking to 2 of my friends, one of them who was going to start as a developer at Atlassian, and then the other one who was heading up finance and planning. at a big software company called Explore Technologies, which is a Kiwi company that's kind of grown around the world through acquisition. And yeah, we kind of end up talking about ideas, and procurement was like a thing that we kept coming back to, because Matt, they're both called Matt, unfortunately. But Matt Whiting, who was working at Explore Technologies, procurement kind of fell under his remit, and he had gone through these procurements despite them not really understanding how to do procurement properly. So that's kind of where we started. And then we ended up building a supplier side product. So kind of like MVP, helping people get procurements essentially. Pretty quick, like realized it was like a cool idea, but it was more of a feature than an idea. So that's kind of when we pivoted into what we're doing now, which is kind of selling small and medium procurement teams to actual purchasing teams and purchasing organizations. Spun up MVP, and then like raised last year, which we've just announced in the last kind of 2 months.
2.2?
Yeah, 2.2 million NZD.
Yeah, nice, man. And so developer to advertising type people,
so like
different skill sets.
One like kind of finance, operations, legal guy, one sort of marketing, I guess, advertising sales guy, and then one developer. Yeah.
And so, what, obviously the guy Matt from Explore had worked in software startups before.
So he joined Explore when it was 300 people, and then by the time he left, it had grown to like 3,500. They got acquired by a PE fund and then kind of grew that way.
Yeah, cool. So did you guys have confidence in what you were doing, or were you just like, hey, we pull at this string until something comes out of it?
I think it's kind of interesting. Like I always think that like the best place to start a startup is just like a really big problem space where there's like tons of different issues.
Like a big white bit of paper.
Yeah, and like procurement really struck us as like this space where there were a lot of different interesting problems that you could solve. The problem that we ended up choosing was kind of this issue around small and medium procurement teams. But I equally think there are like heaps of problems to be solved at enterprise. I think there are heaps of problems to be solved, for like smaller procurement teams, and for suppliers as well. So it's kind of a big white sheet of paper.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like it's right at home for you.
Yeah, totally.
And so what did the first three months look like?
Well, so for the first 3 months, we were working out of my co-founder, Matt O'Halloran's kind of parents' spare bedroom.
Perfect.
Because he had moved back home.
That's a good origin story there.
It was, don't get me wrong, it was like a nice spare bedroom. It was like next to the garden. It wasn't, kind of garage or anything. And then I reckon there was probably like 6 to 9 months of us just like trying to work out what the problem space was, kind of running tests, running MVPs. And then I guess, what year is it now? 2023. Kind of like October 2021.
Were you moonlighting while doing this?
No. I was like fully in, living with my mum, burning through my savings.
Yeah, nice.
Kind of like doing like the odd little bit of like contract work.
Yeah.
For some of my friends, and doing random labor jobs and things like that.
Yeah.
And then there was quite a long time of like us just trying to figure out the problem space, kind of spinning up little MVPs and just testing stuff. And then we kind of focused in on our problem of servicing small and medium procurement teams, kind of low implementation, easy to use software. That was probably October of 2021. Probably spent 6 months building an MVP, and then started the raise process in May 2023 after we'd kind of like got 2022 after we got customers. And then that raise process probably took 6 months. Ended up raising, last year.
Yeah, it would have been an interesting time when you started to then that raise process, because the sort of world changed around us, in terms of raising money and the market and COVID and the likes. Did you?
I think we were like the last cohort that kind of got the like upswing. But I think if we'd raised 4 months later, it probably would have been a lot harder for us.
Yeah. That's a real interesting timing. Like, there's a lot of startups going through it now that are just bootstrapping for a lot longer now because of they have to, right? Not out of choosing for it. And so what does that give you then? Like, so 2.2, where does that take you now?
Yeah, so I think without any revenue, I think we kind of run out of money probably towards the end of Q1 next year, but that's with like a pretty hefty marketing budget and, investment into sales and things like that. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of like fat that we could cut before, even like looking at stuff. Yeah. That could like extend that runway. And that fat doesn't kind of really come in until, like 3 or 4 months beforehand. Yeah. And I think the benefit for us is like our customers pay a year in advance. Yeah. So, kind of every customer that we sell buys us more and more runway. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And so what's the team look like now?
Yeah. So we've got 4 developers, five developers. We've got 1 starting soon. We've got 2 designers. Obviously we've got kind of like Matt Whiting leading the operations team, which is just him. And then we've got myself and sort of 2 other salespeople. One of them's like half product, half sales. And then we've got like one, I guess, like pure SDR. So it's kind of 2 salespeople, but it's across 3 people.
Yeah. This is a decent little team then already.
Yeah.
And how did you do the assigning of roles? Was it just naturally where everyone sort of went?
Yeah,
in terms
it
of
was
the
just
3
naturally.
co-founders?
Yeah, Matt Whiting's probably like the most floaty one. He kind of moves from development into growth and then sort of back and forth, just because he's kind of got skill sets. He's got a comp sci degree, but he's obviously also worked in business for quite a long time, so he can kind of do both.
Yeah, cool, man. And so ironically, right, your study and then commercial experience sort of works nicely with this product now, right? In terms of like stacking of experience to get to a certain level of a product.
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely like a space that I've been really interested. It's interesting because like in advertising, I worked with really, really big clients who had, tens of $1 million to spend. So it's interesting trying to like apply those same principles with like a few thousand. So it doesn't necessarily tee up that well, but we've got some amazing kind of agency partners that we're working with who have been, cut us some pretty good deals and kind of working with them to help do that as well.
Yeah, and what's the difference? So, like coming back from Melbourne, right? I'm from Melbourne. Melbourne's a cool city. It's like a huge New Zealand almost.
Yeah, totally.
In my opinion. What's the difference between coming back to Melbourne and then back into Auckland? What was the feeling for you?
Yeah, I think the thing with Melbourne is that there's just like always stuff happening. Like Victoria is 5.5 million people. I'd have to check that stat, but it's like 5.5 million people. And then I think Melbourne's like at least 4-ish. Auckland's 1 million people. You just get like more, it's going to sound very like tech startup-y, but you get like more like verticalization of interests.
Yeah.
Like if you're really interested in something in Auckland, there might be, 500, 600 to 1,000 people who are interested in that. Whereas in Melbourne, there's like 10,000, 20,000 people who like really care about that specific thing.
Yeah.
Which I think leads to like some really interesting kind of like little communities that spring up. It's also just like a really livable city. Like I didn't have a car at all. Some of my friends had cars, so we go to the beach, but yeah, you can just get around by public transport and things like that.
Yeah, trams are awesome, hey?
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Frances Valentine. Do you know Frances? Awesome. You should look her up. She's a fantastic person. She has that Academy X platform,
cool.
education. And so we were talking about the difference between Kiwi startups and founders than US and around the world. And she said something along the lines of that we should find the weird little things and do them extremely well. And so she referenced like, finance and accounting, and she didn't say procurement, but this is one of those little niches that the ones that people are leaving behind and aren't doing anything in. And is that something that you felt like the procurement industry was something that wasn't innovating and wasn't growing?
Yeah. I think it is innovating. I just think it's innovating at like an enterprise level. Like it's innovating if you're like a 10 to $15 billion plus company with like 100 procurement people. It's super innovative. Like you've kind of got all these really cool, you've got like these like procure to pay suites, which is like their like core system. And then you've got all these really exciting kind of cool modules that kind of exist around them, which a lot of them are startups. And I think those startups have really awesome features. And I think we'll probably build some similar features at a certain point. But they're just not applicable to most procurement teams. So we kind of think of ourselves as like our end goal is to be the most used procurement software in the world, not necessarily used by like the largest companies.
Yeah, by osmosis, you have more people using it. My experience using procurement software as a recruiter, and I have to go through a procurement process with big global tech companies sometimes, right? This is painful. It's like really, really fucking painful, especially for a small to medium business, to have to deal with some of these global companies and go through their process. Laborious, painful. And then if you miss something, you don't get paid for another 60 to 90 days again. And so I find it really challenging. Is that something that you've sort of taken into when you're looking at both sides of the marketplace?
Yeah, definitely. So it's free for suppliers to join Cotiss. I think in the longer term, we would like to build some paid products for suppliers to kind of solve the specific problems that you're talking about. So like one of the innovations I think can be really, really easily done at network scale is we get the buyers to write their procurements in the platform. It's one of the features that we're building. And we're getting suppliers to respond within the platform. we can kind of begin to put in templates on either side. So all of that easily replicable information about like what is your NZBN, like what is your work history, what is your public liability insurance, all of that stuff can kind of like be pre-filled and just exist on your supplier profile. And then you only really need to focus on like the client specific questions, which can kind of make the procurement process a lot less daunting for, I guess, like small and medium businesses around the world.
Yeah, awesome, man. Cool, mate. All right, so what's your title?
I'm co-CEO.
Co-CEO,
technically.
Right? How do you prepare yourself to be a co-CEO of a startup that's just raised $2.5 million?
I don't think you do. I think honestly, like every week is just incredibly different. Which kind of feels like a throwaway line, but it's actually true. Like this week I'm doing this podcast and I'm meeting a whole bunch of mentors and I'm doing some sales calls and I'm kind of like trying to push stuff forward. Like last week was super focused on kind of like a whole bunch of like client response quote stuff. And then, the week before was completely different and next week's completely different. So I think you just kind of have to roll with the punches.
And do you just roll with it, or do you try and educate yourself as much as possible beforehand, or do you just throw yourself into situations and learn from it?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to get better at the education piece. I read a lot, which I think has helped, and I think weirdly, like being an advertising strategist has prepared me well for this role because advertising strategy is like all about reading like a lot of information and then condensing that down into like actually like usable kind of stats and process and stuff like that. So I'm pretty good at like researching and reading like large amounts of information and then condensing that, as I'm sure like anyone who is like an academic or anything like that would be really good at that. So that's prepared me really well. I'm also really lucky that I have two co-founders who I get along with really well. I definitely don't think I could do this by myself. I'm pretty aware of that on a day-to-day basis. So I think having them I honestly don't know how solo founders do it. That sounds incredibly hard.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I think, and co-founders do that often offer a different perspective as well, just to make by osmosis decisions easier because you can steel man it and you can go through and work through the process. Yeah,
100%. And I actually think also like it kind of allows you to be a bit more free in how you think because like I can kind of follow, I can like follow pieces of string, kind of like thoughts along a pathway. And then I know that if I get like too excited about something, that both my co-founders are like fairly risk averse. So they'll generally like, if they're going with an idea that I've come up with, then it's probably a pretty good idea. Whereas it kind of like, brings me down to earth a bit, which is really good.
And did you design what you wanted the company to be, not just the product?
No, that kind of happened organically. We were real lucky to get John G from Xero, who's one of the heads of engineering from Xero.
Love John G.
Yeah, he's awesome. So he's kind of come on as our head of engineering at Cotiss and has brought some real rigor to like how we think about products and things like that. And then we've also managed to get Chris Grief as well, who's an epic developer, and we've got some awesome intermediates.
Love Griefy as well.
Yeah, we've got Ash Keen from Edition as well, kind of leading up our design team. Edition's great, Ash is great. We've just kind of, the way that I've kind of gone about it is like starting a company, I wanted co-founders who were way smarter than me. So I went and found the two smartest people that I knew. And then now we've just tried to hire people who are smarter than them. And I think our like next evolution after our next raise will just be like hiring people who are better than our current employees. And trying to build I think that's how you go about building a world-class team, right?
Yeah, I think it's right. A lot of people just can't do it though. They get to the point where they can't let go of decision making. They can't let go of hiring smarter people because they're worried about it not going their way or their baby, so to speak. How did you get past that from an early stage?
Again, like I think kind of advertising. Like advertising, it's kind of where ideas go to die a lot of the time. Like you come up with these amazing ideas that are you think are just so good, and then you take them to your team and your team's like, this is just absolutely terrible. Like you should be ashamed of thinking of this basically. And then you've got account management, and then you've got clients, and you've got their procurement and legal teams. So you've kind of got all these different ways that an idea can get diluted and killed. So I think it built like a really good resilience in me for just ideas dying and being super comfortable with that fact. It's interesting. Like I think the loss of control stuff is interesting. I think that's kind of where your equity comes in though, right? Like as long as the business wins, that's kind of where my ego sits. Like when we're listing on the NASDAQ, that'll be like my ego moment. I kind of don't necessarily mind if my ego gets crushed along the way and I get told that my ideas are stupid and like I hire people who are objectively better at stuff than me.
Yeah.
That's kind of fine.
So you say when you're listing on the NASDAQ, is that some sort of mental goal that you have in your brain, or is that just a...
Yeah. It's not, I don't think it's actually a goal. I think it's more just like we kind of joke about it internally as being the goal. I think the goal is...
Do you have a framed picture on the wall of the Times Square banner?
Yeah, I want to get one of those bells that they ring so we can start practicing.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
No, I think I don't know that we have like a financial kind of like end goal, like being a $10 billion company or like be like listing on the NASDAQ or anything like that. I think our goal is around servicing kind of like millions of people or, hundreds of thousands of procurement people around the world. And just naturally, if we do that well, it's going to end up as a massive company.
Yeah. So the North Star is to be the most widely used procurement software.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Yeah. And I make that distinct from like, I will really get into details now, but it's kind of like distinct from purchasing because lots of people use purchase orders, but like only a certain type of company does formalized procurement. Mm-hmm. So we kind of eliminate all the purchase order stuff, but yeah, like formalized procurement, the biggest, most used company in the world. Yeah.
Do you listen also to podcasts?
Yeah, I listen to you guys actually.
Yeah, good. Awesome.
And then I listen to Equity, which is TechCrunch's one.
Yeah.
And I listen to Acquired as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of tech podcasts, and then I've got, I don't know, maybe like another 30 that I listen to like odd episodes of if I think it's interesting.
Yeah. And the reason why I ask that is like, geez, because I find that it's chatting with people on podcasts, right? Like I listen to heaps of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of American podcasts, and you can almost hear the story that they're going to tell you before they say it. Like I did this and did that, and I designed this and do that, and the likes. And they have this perfect narrative of what their origin story was and how they got there. And I find with Kiwi companies we're a lot more scrappier, and we tend to say, well, we definitely know what we're going after in a in a roundabout way, but it's the hard work and tenacity and getting together as a team and pushing towards that North Star that usually gets us there versus the deliberate, I'm going to be $1 billion, blah, 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 blah. And so that's obviously the way you think in terms of this is where we're going.
Yeah, totally. Well, I just think like don't get me wrong. I think startups in general for early employees and founders of VCs are like clearly very financially viable. And I think people should be rewarded for, taking on these massive problems. But I think if you're going into a startup just to make money and you don't actually care about the problem space, then you're probably not going to follow through on it. Like it's really hard work. You work really long hours. And I don't know that the maybe promise of money in the future is going to get you through. Whereas if you kind of focus in on solving a problem for lots and lots of people, or like, I don't know, I guess if you're Rocket Labs, solving a problem for like a pretty specific subsection, but a very profitable subsection. Like it's the kind of like the problem and the journey that gets you excited as opposed to the possible rewards in the future. I don't know, I guess if Cotiss fails at some point or, it doesn't quite pan out the way that I want it to, there's still absolutely nothing I'd rather be doing.
Yeah, awesome, man, awesome. How do you find the community in Auckland here now, like of startup people?
Yeah, great. I mean, I arrived like really back to Auckland kind of during COVID, so I don't know what it was like pre-COVID. I will say like I think there's some epic companies coming out of New Zealand. Like Tracksuit, Partly, First AML, Aura have all been super supportive of us. I'm probably missing like 5 or 6 people. Yeah. Lawview as well, which is crazy similar to us, except for like in the legal space. Yeah. So I really like them. I think there's some amazing companies coming out of New Zealand. And I think because you kind of had like Push Pay, Zero Vend.
Yeah, we're in that next wave now, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we've matured to the point in New Zealand where it's not just the zero ecosystem.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Or push pay ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, I think you've almost got like another wave though, right? You've got like the companies that are at 100 to like 300, 500 people, like, I don't know, First AML or I would kind of put in that bucket.
Yeah.
And then I guess you've kind of got the next wave, which is like companies that are like 10 to 50, 60 people. I guess like Partly's, I actually don't know how many employees Partly has, but like kind of in the middle of that. So I think you've got some just really exciting stuff happening, and it's cool. Like it's cool that Vend, Pushpay, Zero, like all employees from those companies have left and kind of either started or are working at companies like John G, Chris, people like that.
Yeah, no, they just spread out in the ecosystem, right? And then they bring that decision making ability with confidence to help you. And so, do you how do you go about making a decision? So you talked about before you've got three people, 3 co-founders.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about making a decision if they disagree with you? Can you push past that, or is it by 2 against 1? You can't make the decision.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the decision is, right? So if it's like a marketing and sales or like investor relations decision or brand or something like that, just me and Matt Whiting make it, and unless it's a really big decision, generally we just do it. If it's a product or development issue, it's generally in the Matt's ballpark. I get brought in to talk about what customers, like basically bring the customer perspective, but they do all the prioritization and things like that. If it's like a bigger business pivot problem, which to be honest, we haven't really had a problem in the last year that has required all 3 of us to make a decision on something. But like the last big pivot decision we made was probably moving from like supplier side stuff to moving to buyer side stuff in the procurement process. And that was like all 3 of us plus investors plus advisors plus a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, interesting, man. The 3 EO model, right, seems to be going pretty crazy now, like with 3 people wearing that sort of CE hat.
Yeah, well, so we got me and Matt Whiting are technically the co-CEOs, and then Matt O'Halloran's kind of like CTO / moving into like a head of product role. But yeah, honestly, I think at our size, like all of those titles are just kind of a little bit meaningless. Like there's not enough layers of management, and nor do we need many layers of management. It's kind of just everyone does what they're good at, and then if you need other people's input, you have other people's input, and there's kind of this natural like, oh, this is a decision that it feels like I should have this person agreeing with it, or like I need to at least get their thoughts on it, but I can kind of make the call. And that just kind of naturally happens. I guess when we get to like 40, 50, 60 people, that's kind of when we'll have to start thinking about like actually like lines of reporting and things like that.
And are you starting to think about the next raise of funding yet, or?
Yeah, I think we're like cautiously beginning to think about it. I think funding is always in the back of my brain. Like funding and selling to customers is kind of the 2 things I think about a lot.
You're always going to be doing it, man.
Yeah, it's definitely like in the back of my mind. It's not something that we're actively pursuing. Like we're talking to VCs and we're getting inbound from VCs and we're kind of having these conversations.
Are you sharing results and the likes with VCs yet?
No. We kind of just like set next catch ups. I think the cadence of having a monthly mail out is great for VCs. I don't think it's that good for the company itself though.
Yeah, it's time consuming, right?
Yeah, it's just like time consuming and like really like the North Star that we need to get to by our next round is like get a reasonable amount of people who love our product and are paying for it. And that's kind of doesn't need to be put in an email. And I guess when we get our first customer, I'll tell everyone. When we get our 10th customer, I'll tell everyone. But yeah, it's before that. I think it's kind of a bit of waste of time.
So talk me through the funding. Funding at the moment is probably the most pertinent thing in the startup ecosystem with all the early stage founders that I'm talking to, right? That's the thing that's keeping them up at night. Talk me through the process that you went through. What was the things that you wish you knew now?
Yeah, let me just readjust that. Because that will go on the mic.
Yeah, good.
Cool. So we were really, really lucky in our raise process. So the way that we went about it was we went and spoke to a whole bunch of angels for like probably 3 months. Pretty much anyone that would like take a phone call, take a meeting, anything, we would just speak to them, and then we pretty systematically began to identify like what problems they were having and where people were getting stuck. So, and then the
problems that you had with your product,
with the pitch, with the product, with us, with like anything, and there were like pretty consistent issues that came about, and we went about.
What were they? Can you say?
I think there were people firstly like didn't get what procurement was. I think there were like issues around TAM, how we were describing the TAM. I think people were like unclear about what our roadmap was. They weren't sure about how our go-to-market would work. Like there were pretty consistent problems. So we looked at solving all of those, like came up with like really good ways to explain it, really clear, kind of succinct slides and things like that. Then when we felt comfortable
how long did that take you?
Probably 3 months. We were doing other stuff at the same time. We were kind of in full raise mode. We're probably spending 20 hours a week each on it. And then once we had like a really clear, succinct story that people were getting really, really excited about, that's when we took it to bigger investors. So we took it to kind of bigger angels and we took it to VCs. And then we managed to get term sheets from, I think most of the people we spoke to. And we ended up kind of going with our current selection of investors for...
What made you choose the investors?
Well, Icehouse had invested in us kind of a year and a half beforehand. They gave us like a little bit of money and they gave us some office space, which was very, very nice of them, because I think at that point they were like,
shout out to Icehouse. They're letting us do this podcast in their facility right now.
Yeah, Icehouse and Barnaby are absolutely amazing. And they were super supportive at a time when honestly I think they were just going, these guys seem smart. Procurement seems like a big thing. We'll just give them some money, some office space, and like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But otherwise, we kind of get first dibs on their next round, which has worked out really well for them. So we really wanted them in the round because we kind of really enjoyed working with them. And then we ended up going with Blackbird as our lead investor, primarily just because their process was amazing.
Yeah.
Like everything was super clear. Everything was really easy. It wasn't easy, but it was really clear what the next steps were. You kind of get an internal champion and then you go to IC. James Palmer, who was the investment analyst at Blackbird, was just awesome to work with. He got the problem immediately and then, went through it. And I think that's a decision that we feel really good about. And then AfterWork is kind of our other probably bigger VC. We really like them just because they're sort of, I guess, like young, scrappy, almost like startup-esque, and just come across as really good operators. And then we had Mahesh from Phase 1 Ventures. We had Maxine Minter from Co1 Ventures as well, who's just amazing when it comes to insights into the US market and US VCs. That's kind of her whole thing. So she's been really good. And it's been like a really good panel. And then we had some angels as well.
Sounds like a good mix, man. And how did that feel when the money kicked in? Did you feel the pressure straight away, or did you feel validated?
Yeah, we felt validated for about 5 minutes, and then we were like, "Cool, all right, we now actually need to do."
Now the work starts.
Like we now need to do the thing that we promised all these people that we're going to do. I don't really think of. I think it's really nice getting really good validation from people you really, really respect. But like at the end of the day, like the validation that we really, really want is customers loving and paying for our product. And I feel like that's when I first started and I heard people say that, I thought that was like a throwaway line that people said to tell you how much they cared about customers. But like it's actually just not that valid. You kind of go, okay, great. These people think it's great. It's awesome. They're backing behind us. This is absolutely fantastic. But like talking to customers is always so much more validating because you're like, yes, this is a giant problem. We are so correct.
There's the difference. Like, so I'm involved in a lot of startups. I've got a few startups. I will recruit for a lot of startups. And it's always interesting that initial stage, right, where you're building something and you bring in your friends that are customers or people in that space to validate the problem, and you go through and you're always like, oh, am I getting the real truth here? Is this a thing that are people just being nice to me? But when you get that first paying customer that's come that you just didn't expect or you didn't know, that's that moment of validation is just like, fuck yeah, I know what, this is why we're doing it, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think like for us, that's been like local councils in New Zealand, like small government agencies have been super supportive of us. I think they like a local New Zealand company. But like as of Australian kind of councils and things like that, like, New Zealand's basically a state of Australia at this point.
Yeah, I can't say that as an Aussie. You can as a Kiwi.
So I think they've been incredibly supportive as well. I don't know to what extent like government is set up to deal with startups is kind of an interesting problem that we're contending with.
Yeah, so I've been chatting with Lawrence Pidcock who's the Chief Procurement Officer in government. Yeah.
I love Lawrence.
Yeah. So I want to get him on the podcast to talk about how government and startups can work better together and how we can like understand.
Get me on the podcast with Lawrence and I'll talk about it with him.
Yeah, that'd be fun, man. Yeah.
No, Lawrence is epic. He
seems like he's trying to do good things, man.
He is. Honestly, like I think Lawrence is like exactly what would be great for government infrastructure and dealing with startups. Yeah. Because I think he's like cognizant of the fact that no one ever got fired for buying IBM, right? It's kind of the old saying. And I think that's very much true in government. Like sometimes people won't do what is the best thing because they're concerned about the risk of it. And that's really problematic for startups. Yeah. But I think the government's kind of growing willingness and like hopefully that kind of continues to grow to award contracts to startups and like mid-sized New Zealand companies. If they can be the first customers for a lot of these startups, like those startups can grow into epic companies that bring, like hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue to New Zealand and, pay that investment back hundredfold.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not in the rooms chatting with government people, but I think there's like a growing sense of like how that would work and a kind of growing willingness. Like they've got this thing called broader outcomes, which is like kind of the broader outcomes beyond basically money. And they're working with, like one of the big outcomes is working with more Māori and Pacifica suppliers, which is awesome. But then they've also got one working like trying to award ITC contracts to basically New Zealand companies, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, I feel that, right? And I've gone through the process recently with, all the government, which is why I haven't had Lawrence on the podcast before, because we can only do it now that the process is sort of finished with Talanami and all the government.
Yeah.
But I was really curious to talk to him, not about recruitment, but about startups, right? And around how we can educate the tech startup ecosystem a little bit in terms of how they can go through a procurement process with government, what they need to learn and what they should be doing. Because I think a lot of startups just don't even bother bidding for work, via government in New Zealand because they just assume that it's IBM or it's someone that, that you won't get fired for.
Yeah. I think it's so difficult because like it is a lot of work to bid for government contracts. Like we went through an RFP for a government agency 2 weeks ago, and obviously we haven't heard anything back about it. But like that took one of our co-founders a full week of work. And then I think me and Matt Halloran were like kind of peripherally involved, and that's probably 10 hours of work each. So across the startup, that's like it's a pretty substantial chunk of work. I think the thing I would say is like once you've done it once, you kind of have all the stuff that you need. The questions end up being pretty similar across RFP. So I think if you can get it done once and get it done well, then it's a bit easier to kind of go through the process again and again. And I think there is like a willingness, especially in the New Zealand government, to at least like hear people out. Yeah. It's not like you're bidding for the American federal government or something like that, who just that's not happening.
Yeah. I think everyone should go through an RFP process early, so that they can understand what the process is. And like you say, you build a backbone for future opportunities that you can grow upon, because it is a laborious task. Like when I go through it, I call it my evening work. And so I'm like, all right, how many hours have I got for my evening job that I can do, which is working on everything that's not tangible in the business that week,
Yeah.
But it's like bidding or awards or whatever it is and the likes. And if I usually find myself spending 4 to 5 hours a night after work working on RFPs. But once you've done it once, and like you've got a really good government one, then you've got a really good private one, you've got a really good thing. It becomes easy. You can just build upon it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of have those like pretty set questions, right? There's only, I imagine for recruiting services, there's only so many ways they can ask you.
Yeah. It's yes and no, right? Like it's funny. The procurement process is funny because it's usually the people at the end of the procurement process when you're going through the presentation stage that you get asked some weird fucking questions. I got asked, and I won't say where. What would happen if this is when cyclone? What was it in Auckland? What was the cyclone, Jono? What was the hurricane recently? The big weather bomb that was here, and it was all flooding and the likes. I can't remember, but when that was happening, they said, "Troy, what would you do if all the recruitment companies that we were on our panel suddenly fell over because of the weather, the cyclone, and you were the only recruitment company left, to be able to service us?" And I was like, well, I said, I'd probably be more worried about if my friends were alive, and I wouldn't be worried so much about recruiting, but do you really need me to answer that question? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, I would get support from other recruitment companies and try and support my friends that just lost their jobs or whatever it is. And so, and I could see them all like taking notes down and, being real vigorous. And I thought, what the fuck has this question got to do? Like disaster recovery, right? Yeah, there's a difference to be able to answer that question, but where did that, how is that going to be graded on if I'm good or not? Whether my ethics are good or my values are good? And so, yeah.
Yeah, it can be a really weird and kind of daunting process. I think once you go through it a couple of times though, right, like you kind of begin to just accumulate yourself with the oddities that exist in the procurement space. But yeah, like I do genuinely, especially Lawrence, like I think Lawrence and the New Zealand government in general are taking really cool steps to work with not just tech companies, but like a whole range of, social progress and like the Akina Foundation's doing some epic work. You've got kind of Amatai who are helping sort of index Māori and Pacifica, specifically Māori suppliers. So I think there's some really cool stuff that they can do to kind of like galvanize those more targeted groups.
Yeah. What do you do outside of New Zealand? Are you to learn and understand markets globally?
Yeah, so we view ourselves as an ANZ company. So we already have customers I suppose we already have users using our product in Australia. We're kind of having early conversations in the US and the UK. I think the benefit that we have is the procurement process is pretty similar no matter where you go. It's kind of a world standard best practice procurement. And I actually think the New Zealand government is, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK are really far forward in how they think about procurement. The US is not.
Yeah.
The US is really behind in how they think about, at a public level at least, how they think about procurement is very lowest price, who can do this the quickest, not who can do this the best. I won't get too into the procurement process, but there's different ways you can evaluate a procurement process, and there's lowest price conforming where you only open the lowest price bid, and then if that bid is good enough, you just go with that and you don't open the other ones. And then there's the opposite of that, which is Brooks Law, which is you do all the non-price weighting, and then you basically have a set budget and you open the best scored bid, and if it fits your budget, you just go with that one and you don't open any of the other prices. So it's kind of different ways that you can evaluate procurements that lead to very different outcomes. And if you're just doing lowest price, you're going to have a pretty set series of outcomes.
Interesting. Have you been through the process with any of Callaghan or anything in terms of funding?
Yeah, I think we got R&D credits from Callaghan.
Yeah.
I think my co-founder Matt Whiting is the only part of our business that is making money, because he's just doing R&D credits and R&D tax breaks and a whole bunch of stuff. So I think he's the only profitable section of our business is the operations team.
That's on your investment deck, profitable sub part of our business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, awesome, man, awesome. And so, what do you think now? So now that you're in this period, right? You've got what did you say? The runway is 12 and a half.
Yeah,
18 months.
12, 18 months, about that.
What are going to be the most challenging parts, over the next 12 months for you? Talk us through it.
Yeah, so I think we basically have two massive challenges. So one, we've recruited a really, really good team. We've got really great investors. So one, building a product that people really, really love, and then two, getting people to pay for that product.
Yeah.
It's kind of reasonably simple when you break it down like that. Obviously, it's actually incredibly difficult on both sides, because we have to work out what the sales process is, what the sales motion. We've got to kind of deal with security teams, things like that. Again, shout outs to John G for knowing everything about security teams. And then obviously building a product that people really, really love is kind of difficult, because different people have different ideas of what a product is and what they want to see. So it's about prioritizing that and kind of really nutting down to a pretty select set of customers who you think are going to pay for the product.
Do you feel more pressure on you because you're wearing the sales hat?
Yeah, I mean, I see how much my co-founders are working, so I don't think there's more pressure, but I definitely feel a lot of pressure to kind of get stuff in the door.
Yeah. How do you personally work through that? How do you not burn yourself out in the early days?
That's a really good question. We're still not that good at not burning ourselves out. I think it's pretty easy to get burnt out when this is kind of an all-consuming obsession for you.
Yeah. I personally don't think burnout is just such a horrible term, such a horrible thing. I think if you should have a fuel gauge in your body, right? That where empty is, and never to get yourself to empty. But you got to deplete the tank, to be able to do what we do in startups, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think the way that we manage that is if people just need to take an afternoon off, they just take an afternoon off.
Yeah.
Or if people need to take a day off, they just take a day off and have a long weekend, or don't work during the weekend, or things like that.
Yeah. One thing that I've heard that's really good that is stolen from couples relationships that founders are now using, and I'm telling a lot of my clients and founders to start using, is when you've got 2 or 3 founders. You talked about it before. I don't know how people do it on their own. I was a sole founder for a long time. Guaranteed burnout, right? You fucking burn out all the time because you don't have that ability to just offload or ask support or feel validated in your decision making.
Yeah.
And so with multiple founders, one thing that I've heard that works really well is at the start of each week, they'll come together and they'll say, how you feeling? And they'll go, oh, I'm about 30%. And the other person might say, oh, I'm 70%. The other person might say, I'm this. And they'll say, all right, largely if there's 300% here, we're missing about 80%. Hey, I can pick up this slack this week. I can do this. I can have a bigger week than you this week, or you can do it. And I think I've seen that work really, really fucking well, because you can't be 100% at all times.
Yeah.
And I think talking about it with your co-founders really helps people to be able to lift in other areas.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did really well, like really, really early on, was we did like a ways of working, basically workshop. Because I think both my co-founders really just like to grind, and they're happy to just like spend 10 hours staring at an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Whereas I kind of need like lots of validation and like task switching, especially when I'm doing sales, because it's not something that I enjoy, but you got to be really high energy to do it well.
Yeah.
So I think that's worked out really well for us. Is kind of like being cognizant of the different ways that people work and when to leave people alone and kind of like when to engage with them.
Yeah. Do you follow the Pomodoro technique of working?
I try to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard not to in sales, man. You've got to get find those little dopamines and then take a break.
Yeah. When I'm doing cold calling, I do like 15 calls. I try and do like 10 calls an hour. So if I burn through like 10 calls, I just burn through 10 calls in like, 10 minutes. I've got like 30 minutes to chill out. Whereas sometimes like those 10 calls will take like an hour, and then I'm like, okay, cool, I'm going to burn through the next 2 10 really quickly.
Yeah, it's funny how no one realizes they're a salesperson. Everyone hates a salesperson or doesn't realize they're a salesperson until they start found a company and then realize, oh fuck, I'm a salesperson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to be passionate. I think it's easy to do sales, something you care about.
Yeah.
I just do not think I could be like a sales machine for a salesperson for like, I don't know, like insurance or like something like that. I don't think I'd be emotionally be able to do it.
Yeah.
I think I can like kind of just do it because I really care about the product.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Yeah, so we're at that part of the podcast where I sort of finalize with a final question, which is based around information sharing, right? And so I think, as I sort of alluded to, like we set up this podcast because we want to share information. We want other people to be able to learn, because a lot of Kiwis, we're just scrapping and trying to find our way everywhere. And so what's the one thing that you would say, hey, put this in the show notes, this is something that you should look at because it moves me, or it's something that I really get enjoyment out of?
Yeah. I think the blog for me that I've discovered that's amazing is Paul Graham's blog. He founded YC. He's kind of like one of the old school grandfathers, dons of Silicon Valley. And he just has like amazing insights into how companies function, how startups function. I guess like also like how life functions. Yeah. He's got some pretty good essays on just like life and a kind of existence. The other one is Sam Altman, who I kind of found through Paul Graham. Yeah. He has a amazing essay called The Years Are Short. Oh, the years are long, but the decades are short, which is like about how you can be really, really, really busy all the time, all year round. And then you get to the end of a decade and you've achieved kind of absolutely nothing, and just like, you've felt like you've done all this work and there's been absolutely no increase in anything. So I think those two are doing some real cool thinking about how to apply, like, I guess like also just like good startup thinking, but also how to apply like philosophy and things like that to startup life. Yeah.
So Sam's obviously hit some home runs recently.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What's your take on using ChatGPT in procurement?
I think there's some cool stuff that you can do with kind of natural language models in procurement. We're looking at some features for kind of once we've built out the platform a little bit later next year. And I think it'd be real cool for kind of like non-procurement professionals to make the whole thing a bit easier.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of people, it's award season at the moment, and I think I'm worried that ChatGPT servers are going to be down in New Zealand because so many people are using ChatGPT for award season at the moment. Yeah, man. Hey, awesome. So it's been real cool chatting with you, dude. I think I love hearing these stories, of like people that find their way into a startup because of a problem they're trying to solve, or because they felt really passionate about it. And sitting across the podcast table, I can always tell when someone's just being authentically honest about, this is something I'm truly passionate about, because we don't have to worry about the conversation. It doesn't feel, I didn't actually even look at the questions that I had to be, to plan for this. And so
we went walkabout.
Yeah, good sign, man. Good sign. So, hey, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. For those that want to go off and check you out, where should they go off and look?
They can look at Cotiss at cotiss.com. That's COTISS.com. You can hear I spell as sales calls every day. Or just look at my LinkedIn. Add me on LinkedIn and we can get a coffee, hang out.
Yeah, awesome, man. All right. All the best, man. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, cheers.
Cool. Well, Harry's gone. I'm processing how good that podcast was right now. We're sitting here thinking how phenomenally lucky we are that we get to hear these really cool stories in person, and how lucky you are that we're sharing you with these stories. They're fantastic people that are coming in and giving up their time and talking about what's working for them, what's not working for them. And so I hope you're hearing these lessons. I hope that you're enjoying some of these things and the stories that people are talking about as much as I am, because it's really phenomenal that we get to live in a country where it's so small that you get to hear someone on a podcast and probably reach out and have a coffee with them off the back of it. And so until next time, thank you so much for watching and listening, and thank you for everyone that's supporting us, especially our subscribers. We can't do it without subscribers because we're building it and we're getting bigger and better. We're going to events now, we're going to different locations, and we're only able to do that if people subscribe, so that we can go out and get that big bank sponsor money. So thank you so much. And if you're not subscribing, now's your chance. Until next time, I'm Troy Hammond. See you later.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.